Fourth session on Christian pastoral listening. If you haven't seen the first three, some of this might be a little bit difficult to follow, but it is all on video on the Disciples of Jesus Canberra YouTube site. Session today, I'm going to give a bit of an introduction for about 10 minutes, which will be partly a recap and highlighting a few key things that perhaps weren't sufficiently highlighted the last three times. Then the main part of the input today is going to be on dealing with difficulties in our practice of listening in pastoral care. I'm sure you're all looking forward to that, because if you've been paying any attention to this at all, you've been finding it difficult, haven't you? It is difficult. And then at the end, we're going to do the triads exercise again, break up into threes and practice listening to one another. All right, so we'll have the slide up, please, the second slide. This is a bit of a summary of the really key things so far. I've introduced two key practices, and we need to do both if we are to be adept at the kind of listening skills that I'm seeking to impart to you here. So it's a twofold thing. On the one hand is what you would expect. We're talking about being trained in our practice of pastoral care. And in the first session, I suggested to you an approach to listening to someone else, which is about two things. It's about looking for what God is doing in that person, and it's about being the compassion of God for that person. And this is strikingly different from how we usually approach to listening to other people, where we're diving in there and trying to fix their problems. So it's the opposite of that. We're not trying to fix the other person's problem. We're A, looking for what God is doing to fix the problem, and B, ministering the compassion of God. Leaving things the way they are, but seeking to draw out what God is doing. The second thing from the second session was the practice of attention to experience. PC, obviously, pastoral care, ATE, attention to experience. And that is listening to myself in exactly the same way that I might listen to someone else. And I have suggested to you that the practice of writing down a description of our experience, including all the feelings, the thoughts, the inclinations, the bodily experience, the memory, the imagination, all of that, is a way in which I can be both the speaker as I write and the listener as I look at what I write. I can be both at once. And so in this second exercise of attention to experience, I do exactly the same thing as in pastoral care, only now I'm listening to myself. Just by the way, the critical thing about writing is I'm getting the experience out into the physical world, which is the same as when I listen to somebody else, that person speaks to me, gets his or her experience out into the physical world. There are alternatives to writing if you don't like writing. Just speaking it out loud could be a way of doing it. Or some people like to draw, or like people with artistic skills, like to somehow artistically draw their experience. I mean, you could probably dance it too if you wanted to. The critical thing is it's not staying in your head, it's getting out there, and then the process of getting it out there into the physical world enables you to listen to what it is at the same time as speaking what it is. Now, these two practices, you have to do both if you're going to be good at it. They are mutually complementary. Okay, we can leave that up for the time being. Now, while our concern in these seminars is to grow in the practice of pastoral care, if you look beneath the surface of these practices, what it really is, it's much bigger than just the practice of pastoral care. It's really a whole spirituality. What we're doing in these practices is we are expressing the fact that God is present in all of our experience. All of our experience, everything that happens to you all the time, God is present in that. And so it's worth paying attention to it. Also, by paying attention to our experience, what we're doing is we are bringing our experience into relationship with God. So God is already in all of our experience, but then we are bringing all of our experience into our loving dialogue with our Heavenly Father or with Jesus, our brother. So it's a whole spirituality. It's bringing all of life. Well, all of life already is in God, and it's recognising that, and then it's bringing all of life into our relationship with God. Much bigger than just what we do occasionally when we sit and listen to someone else formally in the practice of pastoral care, right? Now, what that might suggest is that I must admit, I tend to gravitate into talking about this as dealing with problems. And we do a lot of that in our pastoral care, don't we? People bring us problems and we listen to those. But it's much bigger than that. In fact, it's at least as important. It's at least as important when we're listening to someone else or to ourselves that we're paying attention to grace. I don't mean... you're probably used to that grace, aren't you? That we're paying attention to the moments when God is showing up in our lives, when he's speaking to us, he's whispering to us, he's moving us, he's encouraging us, he's enlightening us, he's clearing the way for us. Those moments of spiritual consolation, those moments of inspiration, those moments when the Holy Spirit is speaking to us. Good charismatics, we're always looking for the Holy Spirit speaking to us, aren't we? Paying attention to those moments is at least as important as paying attention to the trouble. And I encourage you, in your practice of pastoral care, to be not only listening to the problems, but also be looking for where's God showing up in this person's life. Now, there's a really wonderful and strange thing that you find when you... Well, the difference between paying attention to problems and paying attention to grace. When you pay attention to problems, difficulties, struggles, what tends to happen is we experience a sense of separation from the problem and the power of the problem lessens. This is simplistic, obviously. I'm doing this quickly. But it's a typical effect of paying attention to the problem that I start to get a bit of distance from it. As I look at it, it starts to appear out here and it loses some of its power over me. But the opposite happens when we pay attention to grace, when we pay attention to the work of God in our lives. What happens is the little flame of goodness starts to get bigger when you pay attention to it. It strengthens, it envelops you. You are immersed in it. It's such a paradox. Now, I have a theory of why this is. When we pay attention to problems, they lessen. When we pay attention to grace, it increases. But I'm not going to take time now to explain to you my theory. My theory might even be wrong. The important thing is it happens all the time. Over and over and over and over again. It's mind-boggling. So pay attention to everything. If it's a problem, it'll get less. If it's a grace, it'll get bigger. And if it's just ordinary life, you're bringing that into your relationship with God, who is interested in everything that goes on in your life, as is anybody who loves you. So we bring everything into our relationship with God. I just want to now talk about one somewhat new idea which I think needs to be added to, I mean, I've given you most of what I need to give you, but one somewhat new idea. And then we're going to get on to looking at approaches to dealing with the difficulties that come up when we do this. So what I want to talk about now, just for a couple of minutes, is the use of imagination in this. This might sound a little bit strange because the whole thrust so far has been we're paying attention to reality. The two key questions in this practice, as we're paying attention to reality, is what was that like when we're looking at something that happened in the past? And what is that like when we're looking at something that's happening now? Okay? Clear enough? When we start to touch into the use of the imagination here, the question is not what was that like or what is that like, but what would that be like? If you like, you can think of this as paying attention to the past, what was that like? The present, what is that like? So while you're talking about a past event, you might ask the person, what's actually happening in you now while you're talking about that? See? What was that like? What is that like? But also, as I've said to you in the previous sessions, one of the things that we're noticing when we pay attention to an experience is what is coming up in terms of our desires to respond. What does it make you want to do, this experience? If we're paying attention to a fear, you might describe what that fear is like in your body, but what does that fear make you want to do? If we're paying attention to anger, what's the anger like in your body? You can feel it in your body, can't you? What's it make you want to do? Makes you want to run around the room smashing things and screaming. It does, doesn't it? Yeah. So the question is, what would it be like to run around the room smashing things and screaming? Imagine that. It's amazing how illuminating it can be to actually do the exercise of imagining what it would be like, this desire that's come up within me. Similarly, if I have a hope come up as part of my experience, what would it be like if that happened? You see? Or if I've got a fear, it can be very useful for paying attention to fear, to working out what's going on in fear, to say, and it's very hard to do as well, you really need to create a space of compassion and trust and encouragement to do this, but to say, what would it be like if that happened, that thing that you fear? That can be extraordinarily enlightening and also liberating. Okay, I'll have that next slide up, please, Nick. So there's a summary, or the first part of it is a summary of what I've been saying. We're going to ask, what was it like? What happened in the past? What is it like? What's happening now? What would it be like? That thing that's coming up in you that's oriented to the future, a hope, a fear, a desire, an inclination. What would it be like? But then the other thing that imagination does is, as well as imagination allows us to look at the future, right? Yeah? Imagination also allows us to look at realities that are unseen. Imagine your heart beating. You can do that, can't you? Perhaps not perfectly accurately, but the imagination gets you in touch with reality. It's not a fantasy, is it? Your heart is beating, right? So imagination is enabling you to get in touch with reality. This is useful if, for example, the person says to you something like, I feel as if God is embracing me. Or I feel as if God is looking kindly upon me. The question I would ask then is, what would it be like if God was embracing you? Imagine that and describe that. What would it be like if God was looking kindly upon you? You can't... See, it's important to have this question in your toolkit. What would it be like? Because if you said, what is it like that God's embracing you? What's the person going to say? I'm not real sure whether he's embracing me. So you just say, don't worry about whether he is or isn't. Just imagine what would it be like. Because if a person has that sense that maybe God is embracing me, or that's how I feel, it's probably indicating something genuine that's within there that the imagination can reach, even though we're not sure of it. All right, so that's imagination. Now we're going to get on to dealing with difficulties. First thing I want to say about... there are difficulties, aren't there? It's hard work, and we are constantly running up against the snags and the difficulties, and that's not a problem. That's the way it's meant to be, because the difficulties we're running up against are the difficulties in our souls and in the other person's souls, which need attention, which need to be dealt with. So it's good that we're running into those difficulties. So this dealing with difficulties is not like, taking your bike into the repair shop so much as this is a huge part of the bread and butter of this riding your bike. It's a huge part of it. First thing I want to say, what I've got is 4 strategies or 4 practices that we engage in to help us deal with the difficulties when we're running into problems listening to someone else or listening to ourselves. But before I get to those 4, I've tried to emphasise that we need to be doing both the pastoral care style of listening to someone else and the attention to experience style of listening to ourselves. I've made that pretty clear, haven't I? If you're finding the pastoral care difficult, my first question is, are you actually practicing the attention to experience as well? If you are drawn to attention to experience as a way of prayer, but you're finding it hard, my question would be, are you also exercising the practice of listening to someone else as well? Because if you're doing one without the other, it isn't going to work very well. As I said before, you can't listen well to yourself unless you can also listen well to someone else. You can't listen well to someone else unless you can also listen well to yourself. Conversely, or to put it more positively, listening to yourself provides a lot of keys for unlocking the problems that we run into when we listen to someone else. And listening to someone else provides a lot of the keys for unlocking the difficulties we run into listening to ourselves. As Jesus says, the measure you give out is the measure you receive. Love your neighbour as yourself. If you're trying to do one and not the other, it's all going to fall over. Or like trying to walk when you've only got 1.5 legs. You're going to fall over. It's not going to work. You need both. All right, I'll have the next slide up, Nick. The first thing, and I have talked about this before, just really want to emphasise this. This is the key thing that we do to deal with the difficulties that we find coming up. So if you're listening to someone else and that person is talking about some sort of struggle, perhaps there's, a fear. No, let's say a grief. Let's say there's a grief. And as a person's talking about a grief, what it's doing is it's putting you in touch with some unresolved grief in your own life. And you start to get a bit kind of caught, a bit tight, because this grief you haven't dealt with and you're starting to be pretty uncomfortable. You may not even actually know why. A person might be talking about grief and you're just finding it hard to stay with it. Now, one of two things can happen then, is when you start to struggle, it makes it hard for you to listen to the other, because you're kind of, you're caught in your own thing. Or you start asking questions or giving suggestions to the other person that aren't really aimed at helping the other person, they're aimed at fixing your problem, which is not really helping the other person. So what you've got to do is that grief that was coming up in you, you've got to take that away and pay attention to that in your own attention to experience exercise. To bring compassion to that and healing to that. To encounter God in that. Next time you have to talk to somebody about grief and it starts to touch on your own grief, you'll then be okay to stay with them because you've kind of dealt with it in your own life. I said you take that grief that was getting in the way of your listening to someone else, you take that to your attention to experience exercise, or you can take that to your own pastoral care, hoping that your pastoral carer is also practicing this sort of listening, right? That your pastoral carer will help you to pay attention to this grief experience in your own life. In the same way then, once there has been compassion and perhaps some healing brought to that grief in your own life, you will be then more free next time the grief comes up with someone else. But I hope you can see the implication of this, that this has to be a constant process all the time. All the time when you're listening to somebody, you've got these snags coming up, getting in the way. It's not something, this thing of bring your difficulties into your attention to experience, it's not something you do occasionally, it's something you do every day. Because every day, in your listening to somebody else, something grabbed you that you couldn't deal with. You think, oh, got to go and pay attention to that. All right. Now, we won't put the next point up on the screen just yet. The next point in dealing with difficulties is something that I did try to convey last time, and then I had a very helpful conversation with somebody who gave me some feedback, which really helped to enlighten for me a way that I could convey this, a better way that I could convey this to you. So, when you've got a problem and you talk to a man about it, what's he going to do? That was quick. Exactly. He's going to say, this is what you should do to fix it, right? Yeah, exactly. Okay. When you've got a problem and you take it to a woman, what's she going to do? Come on, sit down, have a cup of tea, tell me about it. Now, okay, don't shoot me for using gender stereotypes, please. There is a point to this. There is a tendency, there's two complementary approaches that we can take to our problems. One is to work on trying to fix it, and the other is to just pay attention to it, to bring compassion to it. And broadly speaking, we can think of the first way as being the masculine approach and the second way as being the feminine approach. Now, before anybody shoots me for using gender stereotypes, obviously both men and women are likely to respond in both different ways. And in fact, both men and women need to learn to respond in both ways. Whichever way you find the less natural way for you to respond, you need to grow in that. And both of those approaches are necessary for us in approaching the difficulties that we have in our life. They line up with, remember I've said that this practice of pastoral care is doing two things. One, it's looking for what God is doing to bring a remedy to our situation. And two, it's bringing compassion to our situation. So there's again the masculine and the feminine. Now the point of using those labels, I know those labels can be a little bit problematic for some people, but the point of using those labels is because it's very clear when we put them in that, put it in those terms, that both are equally important, isn't it? Yes? And that to be whole, we need both in a complementarity, correct? That's the whole point of using this way of talking about it. Now, it seems to me that we very easily get stuck in a very masculine kind of approach to this, where we think it's all about fixing it. We think the whole thing is about getting that breakthrough. And then if we don't feel like we're getting somewhere, we start to really struggle, because the only thing that we're looking for is that masculine progress towards some goal. If we're struggling with this practice because we feel like we're not getting anywhere, we feel like we're not finding what we're looking for, it's most important to think, maybe I'm stuck in this masculine kind of mindset. It's important to understand that if you are listening to yourself or to someone else in this kind of way, you are already bringing the compassion of God to this person. It's already there. Nothing has to happen. Nothing has to change. So just try to remember that if you're thinking, I'm not getting anywhere, I'm not finding what I'm looking for. You're already doing what God wants you to be doing if you're simply paying attention to what's going on and not trying to change it. You are embodying the compassion of Jesus for that person by being willing to sit with that person in what he or she is going through. That compassion is just as important as fixing the problem. In the same way that male and female are equally important and both necessary. But in fact, we might even argue that in the Christian view of things, sitting with the problem is the more important thing. Which is the greater miracle? Jesus' miracle of, raising a paralytic or healing the blind, or the cross and resurrection? Which of those brings more new life? There's no argument, is there? And the cross is the compassion of Jesus. That is Jesus being with us in our sorrows and in our sufferings. You see, that's much more important than fixing. If you look at the life of Jesus, Jesus did all these miracles, but what was the ultimate thing? Was that he died on the cross to be with us in what we're going through. All right, I'll have that next slide up, please, Nick. So, second approach to dealing with our difficulties is to remember that compassion is at least as important as fixing the problem. The feminine response is at least as important as the masculine. If we're stuck in this mindset of, I have to get somewhere, remember that just being with it is at least as important, and that when I'm with somebody in the difficulty, I am practicing the cross. It's a way of carrying the cross, which is a greater healing than anything else that might happen. All right, next slide, please, Nick. The next trick for dealing with the difficulties that we run into is what we've called paying attention to resistance. Now, I have talked about this in the previous session, but just a little bit more detail today to make it a little bit clearer. All right, here is my dodgy, simplistic illustration of you or me, a rather fat neck, but that's okay. Rugby player, right, okay. Or an orangutan or something. Now, we're trying to pay attention to an experience here. So this is, if you're trying to pay attention to yourself, but equally well to an experience, paying attention to an experience in someone else. What we're finding in asking the questions about this experience is that the person that you're talking to seems unable to talk about what's going on. You can see that something's there, but you ask a question, what's going on there? And they dodge it. Have you had that happen? How do you feel about that? And they go on to talk about something else. Or, what's going on there? And they change the subject. Or, what's going on there? And they become all heady. Person just has a whole lot of intellectual ideas about it, but can't actually say what is actually happening to them. Or, they might say, I just feel really blank and numb. I just, And you might keep trying to ask in different ways what's going on there, but you're just not getting anywhere. The thing to do in that situation, or very often in that situation, is to pay attention to the difficulty that you're actually having. It's likely that there's some fear or some anger or some sorrow or something like that that's getting in the way of this experience, which is kind of like, it's sort of like a layer around the experience. You can't actually get to the experience because there's this other thing that you've got to pay attention to first, before the person can talk about the actual experience. When you say, so what you do is you say, okay, I noticed that you're having difficulty talking about this. I asked you this question and, look, with all due respect, you didn't answer the question, you talked about something else. Or you keep changing the subject. If you have the kind of freedom in the relationship where you can be direct like that. What's it like for you trying to talk about this? You seem to be having difficulty talking about this. What are you actually experiencing? The person might say, I feel really tense. Okay, tell me what that tension's like. You see? And once you've paid attention to that tension, you may then be able to, it might set the person free from that, and then you might be able to pay attention to the thing that was behind that. Or it may well be that the thing that's getting in the way is actually the more important thing. You thought that what we should be talking about is this, but you don't know really, do you? The whole point of this is you don't know where it's going. You never know where it's going. So if you hit a roadblock, It could be that where you think you're supposed to be going isn't where you're supposed to be going. So praise God if, you hit the roadblock, you say, well, what's the roadblock like? You find there's fear in there, or there's anger, or there's tension, or there's confusion, or it's a blank. If it's a blank, the person says, I can't answer the question, I feel blank. What's the blank like? What's going on in your mind with the blank? What's in your feelings with the blank? Just pay attention to that. Bring all of that out. One of two things. Either that was the more important thing to talk about today, or, okay, we've talked about that, now we can talk about the thing that we wanted to talk about in the first place. Pay attention to resistance. Fourthly and lastly, this is the one I mentioned this last time, and it caused a bit of consternation because I said this is a truly miraculous trick. But I said last time I don't have time to talk about it. So we're going to talk about it now. This really is astonishing. When we're paying attention to, we'll put it in the context of paying attention to somebody else, although to a certain degree it also applies paying attention to yourself. When you're paying attention to somebody else and you're not getting anywhere, you're stuck, nothing's happening. You know that experience? Happens all the time, even if you're expert, happens all the time. How are you feeling when that happens? Stupid? Yeah, perhaps. Frustrated? Incompetent? Powerless? Confused? Lost? Anxious? Stressed? Irritated? Angry at the other person? Why can't you answer my questions? I'm getting a bit of responsiveness here. I think this happens a lot. You need to know, you have more than enough brain power to listen to somebody else and listen to yourself at the same time. The other person cannot speak fast enough to use up all your mental capacity. The brain is a wonderful thing. You can be paying complete attention to the other person and also be aware of what is going on in yourself as well. Now, this miracle happens. I've seen it. I'm not sure that I can explain this miracle, but I've seen it happen so many times that I just have to say to you, it's normal. When I'm listening to somebody and it's not going anywhere, we're stuck. I ask myself, what is going on in me? Oh, I'm frustrated. I feel like, So in the back of my mind, I'm saying to myself, what would that be like, Tony? And I'm picturing myself, The other person has no idea that that's going on. No idea at all. But what happens then is some new thing emerges, some new lead, or the person says something, oh, that's what we're looking for. And it happens all the time. Or listening to somebody and I think, oh my God, I'm so lost. I have got no idea. There's so many, the person's giving you so much stuff and you can't see any kind of thread or pattern, and you thought that was good, so you tried to talk about that, and then they went off somewhere else, and you tried to talk about the resistance, and they couldn't talk about that, and you thought, okay, we'll look at that something else, and we tried to talk about that, and they wouldn't talk about that either, and it's just, I think, I'm so confused, and I'm so helpless, and the thoughts in my head are, Tony, maybe you're not so good at this after all, maybe you're losing it. Simply being aware that that's what's happening in me and acknowledging that. So often, as soon as I do that, something happens. I've been stuck for the last 58 minutes of the 60-minute session trying all the tricks in the trade and nothing has worked. I think, okay, it's a write-off. It's a failure today. Oh, I'm sorry, I feel so sad and sorry. And then it happens. Now, I think how this works, I think why this works, is if I'm caught in my own frustration or irritation or confusion or sense of being lost or whatever it is, and I'm not acknowledging that, the other person can pick that up. We are amazing at intuitively detecting other people's inner worlds. If you're not dealing with what's going on in you, the other person can, not consciously, but they'll know, and they'll clam up. They won't want to share because you don't look like the sort of person who lives in compassion and trust in God. Because, I can see that you're all tangled up. But as soon as you bring that compassion to yourself, hey, I'm feeling lost and confused. Oh, well. Compassion fills the space and the other person is then set free to say what they need to say. Anyway, I don't know if that's the right explanation, but it happens all the time and it's mind-boggling. We need to have the habit when we're listening to someone else of also at the same time being to some degree aware of what is going on inside ourselves, especially when we run into problems. Listening to the other person. A reminder though, in order to be able to do this, we need to go back to point 1. Actually, we didn't put point 4 up. Sorry, I didn't say so. No. Okay, go on. I gave Nick strict instructions not to put the slide up before I told him. No. Well done, Nick. Well done, Nick. Pay attention to your own experience while you are listening to the other. But in order to do that, you need to go back to point 1 as well. Because if I haven't practiced paying attention to my own frustration, my own sense of being lost, my own confusion, my anxiety, my sense of failure, my fear of failure, my helplessness, if I haven't paid attention to all those things in my life, then when those things come up in my session with someone else, I'm not going to easily be able to say, okay, Tony, you're feeling lost and confused. That's all right. I'm not easily going to be able to do that, am I? But if I make the habit of always taking those experiences into my personal attention to experience, then it's easy, it's second nature when I'm listening to someone else to also be listening to what's going on in myself. And it just transforms the listening process. All right, we're going to do triads.
Am I allowed to ask a question or should I ask you a question?
You can ask the question, and if it's too complicated, I'll skip it for later.
I've come across people over the years that seem to enjoy having a problem and they seem to enjoy living in that problem.
Yeah.
They like to talk about it, but they don't actually want to change it.
Yes.
Do you have any advice? Like, are we enabling? Like, what do you do with those people?
Yeah. Someone who seems to want to stay in their problems. Yeah. Look, that can be caused by any number of different things. And so I don't think there's a standard answer to that, except that if you practice all of this, it will unfold. The answer will unfold. One thing I would probably suggest is once you have listened and demonstrated that you are willing to sit with the person in those problems, you get the license then, because the person begins to trust you, you get the license then to actually say something confronting like, it seems to me that you actually don't want to change. How does that sound to you? Well, how do you feel about my saying that? Person might have a big reaction, but then you work with that. If the person fights back, you say, okay, that makes you angry. Tell me about that anger. And you have to be willing then to take that. But then you've started to break it open. And something, I dare say, will happen. Is that enough? Yeah. It's scary. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, this is scary. I did say to you it's a way of hanging on the cross with the person, didn't I? Don't take that lightly. Really is. This is the way of the cross. This is being willing to die with that person or to be crucified. All right, triads. Same as last time. What I want you to do is to give yourself a number between 1 and 10. You know, most of you know where this is going now, so if you want to inflate the number or decrease the number in order to get the outcome you want, that's up to you. A 10 means you're totally on top of this. You've been practicing both pastoral care listening and attention to experience. You're finding it fruitful, it works for you, you've understood everything Father Tony said. That's a 10. Number 1 is, this is not really me. Yeah, it's interesting to listen to, but I'm not even really going to try practice. And that's okay. You know, God might be doing something else in your life. That's not a criticism. So can you give yourself a number between 1 and 10 to indicate whether you're really on top of this at one end, not that interested on the other end, or kind of so-so in the middle? Everyone got a number? It's both. It's both. Yeah.
Very different.
It's. Yeah. Well, look. Don't down. If you are very interested, you're probably more capable than you think you are. But it is largely about capability too. But don't undersell yourself. Anyway, look. It doesn't matter that much. We don't have to get this exactly right. All right, if you gave yourself a number from 7 to 10, can you put your hand up, please? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, that's probably about right. 7 to 10. I think you'll be the supervisors. Huh? If you gave yourself a number from 4 to 6, could you put your hands up, please? That's a bit more. Okay, what about... Please don't be embarrassed. 1 to 3. 1 to 3. You're not game to put your hands up. Okay. What if it's 3 to 6? Put your hands up if you're 3 to 6. Okay. Right, so what we might try, you're going to have to work with me to massage the numbers a little bit. If you're a 7 or 7 to 10, could you stand up, please? Gosh, there were 7 and now there's only 6. Who copied? Oh, we should. Get up, come on. All right, if you're a 3 to 6, can you stand up and go and attach yourself to a 7 to 10, please? Hold on, people. There was only about 8 of you said that you were 3 to 6. And to have the listener listen to you. So speakers, choose a real experience in your life. It can't be something made up. It has to be something that you feel like you're willing to talk about all the ins and outs of it. So don't choose something that's super, super vulnerable and scary unless you're super, super confident with the people that you're with. Okay? I mean, it's good to talk about really scary stuff, but just for the purpose of the exercise, it's better probably to pick something that's perhaps a little bit less vulnerable. So it's a real thing that you can talk about, and you're happy to have that explored. Listener, what we're going to do is, all right, no, supervisors first. We're going to do 2 lots of 15 minutes. Supervisor, it is your job to keep the time. We'll have 2 15-minute sessions. In the first 15-minute session, the listener listens to the speaker. In the second 15-minute session, the supervisor listens to the listener. Got it? Supervisor, you have to keep the time for both sessions. Supervisor, while you are... So the first 15 minutes is the listener listens to the speaker, seeking to practice all the things that I've told you. Ask about the feelings, the thoughts, the inclinations, the bodily experience, the imagination, the memory. Ask about what was happening, what is happening, and what would it be like if that happened. You ask all those questions. You don't give advice. Speakers, going back to the speakers, your job is to seek to speak without censoring. So you say what is really going on with all the ugly stuff, if you can. Listeners, you are to listen without giving advice, without making suggestions, just ask questions. Got it? Supervisors, I strongly suggest that you take notes while you are observing the first 15-minute session between the speaker and the listener. If you don't have pencil and paper, they are here. Nick, you might want to wander around and give those to people.
You should be right. I'll borrow someone else's.
Oh, I see. All right, attention back this way, please. Supervisors, I suggest that you take notes because, now, listeners, you do not take notes. It's a human interaction. You're actually listening. You're not trying to take notes. But supervisors, you take notes. You're not participating in the first conversation at all. You're just watching. But take notes specifically any time that you think something has happened in the conversation which was really interesting, that looked like it might need a bit of attention. Particularly if you think the listener was struggling in some way, or the listener took the conversation off in some strange direction, which is going to happen sometimes. Take notes. And then supervisor, what you do in the second 15 minutes is you practice listening to the listener. Supervisors, choose one moment in the dialogue which you think was particularly interesting or problematic, and ask the listener what was going on inside him or her when that happened. What was he feeling or she feeling? What was he or she thinking? What was going on? See, this is a way of practicing what I've been saying to you, that while we're listening, we pay attention to what's going on in ourselves. Our supervisors are going to help us do that, to pay attention to what was going on in me as a listener while I was listening. Is it clear enough? Again, supervisors, you are practicing this methodology. You are not giving advice. You are not making suggestions. You are simply asking what was going on, seeking to uncover what was going on. Clear enough? One thing I want to add, which I didn't say last time, observing the groups last time, I realised I should have said this. People, it's not a three-way conversation. It's two-way conversations. So, in the first part, speaker and listener face each other and pretend the supervisor isn't there. In the second part, listener and supervisor face each other and pretend the original speaker wasn't there. So the supervisor does not participate in any way at all in the first session, and the speaker is not speaking to the supervisor at all. Got it? Yeah? And the second part, the speaker is just observing. Clear enough? All right. Timing. Is it okay for us to have two 15-minute sessions, or is that pushing it?
We think it's too long. We could do it.
Sorry? to 13-minute sessions? We're not doing 5. We can't possibly do anything. 12. Sorry? That's not my fault. All right, okay, 2 10-minute sessions, that's okay. Yeah? No, not now. No, sorry, no. Just, are you the speaker? Yeah. Anything that's happened in your life? Anything.
You might have got a mark you didn't like. You might.
Especially anything that had some feeling content to it.
Yeah.
Something that made you feel particularly bad or particularly good.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Can be a positive.
Yeah, can be positive. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. People, sorry, I think maybe it'd be good if some people went into the next room or the corridor. You don't want to be able to hear the group next to you. Yeah, please. Because it's hard to... This really is only 2 minutes, and I thank you for being patient. I know we've gone over time. I know I'd be bothered by that if I was in your shoes. All right, just 3 things to finish up. We're all done now. Just 3 things that I want to suggest. Probably nobody will do this, but I want to suggest it anyway for the record. I think that it would be a very good thing to re-watch the videos once you have practiced this a bit. The material I presented to you has been very dense and I've gone through it quite quickly. It's often been quite abstract because I haven't had time to give lots of illustrations, and that makes it hard. But once you have practiced this, if you listen to it again, it will make a lot more sense, and you'll pick up a lot of stuff the second time that you didn't pick up the first time, I'm quite sure. Secondly, if you have any feedback or questions, that's my email address. I'd be happy for you to email me, or obviously I'm here with you most Sundays, so just come and ask me. As I think you can tell, I'm utterly fascinated by all of this stuff, so to engage with your questions will be a pleasure for me, so don't hesitate. And lastly, for the sake of giving me some feedback, those who were the supervisors in those triads, if you have time to stick around for another 2 or 3 minutes, if you could come and talk to me and just let me know how it went, that would be just useful for me to know how it went. That's it. Amen. Go.